Thank you. I'll start by saying as we approach the anniversary of the Russian Revolution, it certainly feels as cold as Moscow and everything. Hopefully politically the event will reflect that as well. I want to start off looking at the referendum result. And I want to start off with David Cameron when he was in New York, when he was talking to the mayor, where he says that the Queen was putting down the phone at the result. And I can assure you the night before the result, she wasn't putting down the phone. She was sitting on the toilet pan shitting herself. She wasn't on her own, by the way. That goes with the length and breadth of the British establishment all the way across to Washington and the generals in NATO. And the truth of the matter is that there was a huge sense of relief because the ruling class in this country were absolutely terrified and they panicked. Other folk have referred to it in this morning session. They threw everything at it. They threw the kitchen sink at it. The threats of no watching Doctor Who in EastEnders, the prices get up in Asda, the whole range of threats for the Deutsche Bank saying there'll be a Great Depression in the 1930s. They threw everything at it. And let's remember, we only came within 200,000 votes of winning it. A huge achievement. Our movement, the independence movement and the socialist movement achieved absolute marvels in the referendum campaign. And I want to talk about Labour, their role in it, because I don't think there's any doubt about it that they could not have won the referendum without Labour's disgraceful intervention in defending a pro-austerity union. And Labour, in one sense, has fulfilled its historic role. As Trotsky used to say, in any period of crisis, you can always rely on the Labour Party to prop up British imperialism. Shame on them for the role that they played in this referendum. And I also want to mention it briefly because I think there was some people on the left who gave the Tory, the pro-union campaign left-wing cover. And it is with sadness, one of the definite low points was watching George Galloway at the Hydro sitting on the same platform with Ruth Davidson. Am I too close to this, guys? I haven't even started screaming yet, guys. And I think, there's two things to say about that,
You could just move 4 or 5 inches away.
There's two things, I don't even need this to there's two things to say about it. The left arguments against them, on the one hand, they provided mistaken left-wing cover on the grounds that voting no was defending the unity of the working class. Now we have to say that was a mistake because we don't confuse the unity of the British state with the unity of the working class. The second thing that we have to say about it is that we did not describe all the people in the Labour Party and the Labour supporters as scum, as class enemies and so on. It was important that we engaged in a serious argument with Labour voters that argued that it was wrong to stick with the union. They were part of the debates that we took very seriously. And I want to say something that Bob Thompson said this morning, because he said that Scottish Labour won the battle, but it lost the war. There's a great element of truth in that. Look at the vote in Glasgow, right? The 10 parliamentary constituencies, Labour lost in every single constituency. Not one area of Glasgow did they win. This is the pattern in Dundee, in Lanarkshire, and for the folk in Inverclyde, I feel a bit sorry, but 86 votes. Very, very close, but nevertheless, Labour did not manage to convince the traditional Labour supporters to vote to defend the pro-austerity union. But I have to say as well, there was my daughter described it, a 16-year-old on her Facebook page, she says, I'm sad, but I'm inspired. And I think that was the mood of hundreds of thousands, indeed over 1 million people who voted yes. And it doesn't feel like defeat, because a new social movement was born throughout the struggle in the independence campaign. And what I want to argue is that the left, the far left, played a major role in shaping the debate and pushing the debate to the left. And again, I'll take the opportunity to thank Tommy for the wonderful Hope Over Fear tour. 20,000 people. I mean, the highlight of that one for me was at Victoria's, where you had to do 3 seconds to actually get in to the event. This was the part in Aberdeen. I did a meeting with Tommy in Aberdeen where I was inside doing one big meeting and he was outside the house this day, standing on a bollard and talking to 150 odd people. Now this was the pattern across the country, the Hope Over Fear tour. But we also know that the Yes groups, the Radical Independence campaign, anybody who was involved in the mass canvasses that went into the working class housing estates could see what the key issues were that were going to win, that were going to win a yes vote. And what I would argue is that the role of the far left and the left in it, we actually pushed the campaign to the left. Think about it, it wasn't until the second debate where Alex Salmond and the SNP moved on to defending the NHS, opposing privatisation, talking about poverty, 0 hours contracts, and that was a product of a radical, energised, grassroots, working class movement that pushed the campaign to the left. And unfortunately, all the stuff around the currency, the European Union, the constitutional structures, I said that didn't work. Look at the SNP's base. They never took any of their core areas. The middle classes did not vote for independence. So why would we waste 2 years trying to appeal to them and trying to convince them to vote for independence? And what I want to say is, certainly from my point of view, one of the highlights of the referendum campaign was the experience of being in George Square. Because George Square for a week, I mean, what I describe it as a wee whiff of Tahir. I'm not saying it was Tahir Square, but you know, the smell of it was in the air. Tahir was in the square, it was in the city. That's why we all thought we were going to win the referendum in Glasgow. Because it was such a phenomenal feeling and energy. I mean, I went one day where it was a roving right, people would get up and talk about fracking, opposing Trident, people talking about childcare, they need to save the environment, they need to get rid of nuclear weapons. The whole world view was up for grabs by this new movement that had been radicalised across the streets. And we want to keep that movement going. We need to think about how do we continue to mobilise that movement, because people don't want to go back to what they did before. That's why there's thousands on the streets, that's why there's thousands turning up to meetings and joining political parties. I want to say it, we shouldn't be surprised that the main beneficiary in the short term for the referendum campaign is the SNP. Certainly doesn't feel like defeat for the SNP. They've recruited 60,000 members. And if you look at the breakdown of that recruitment, I talked to the organiser for the trade union group for the SNP. They have recruited 12,000 new trade unionists to the SNP trade union group. The Federation of Student Nationalists have recruited over 5,500 have joined the SNP. Now I think that's a sign of the maturity of the activists who in some senses want to stay organised, want to continue the fight, and are looking for a political vehicle to continue that fight. And I don't think it's any accident that the SNP MPs in Westminster voted against the Iraq war. Because there's 60,000 new members who have joined it, who oppose war, who oppose Trident, and I think that's had an impact. That's how it had an impact on that. And I think we should welcome the fact that the SNP MPs did vote against the war. But we have to, as the left, address some of the contradictions of what's happening now. And I think the greatest challenge for the movement, and one of the major challenges for the Scottish National Party, will be how do they now confront the issue of austerity? Because within a week of it, we're bombing Iraq. There's a legacy of losing it. That 1 week we start bombing Iraq. We know that Cameron has announced £25 billion worth of austerity cuts and a £7 billion tax cut for the super rich. So we know what the plan for the Tories is in Scotland and Britain. We know that Labour are committed to the same Tory spending limits and disgracefully announced, 10 minutes already, and disgracefully announced that they're looking for £400 million worth of child benefit cuts. No wonder people want to punish Labour at the next election and see the SNP partly as a vehicle for that. But I agree with what Kevin McKechnie said this morning. Kevin McKechnie said that there's never been a better opportunity for the left to build a new left party in Scotland. That's why I believe that it is a mistake to argue that the primary focus for the left should be a vote for the SNP in the general election in 2015. I equally think it's a mistake, either officially or unofficially, to reduce this great movement to either the official or the unofficial wing of the Scottish National Party. And that's because the SNP is fundamentally a neoliberal party. The truth of the matter is, I believe that the SNP will not deliver on the hopes of millions of people. A couple of examples to show that. They will be confronted with the choice to confront and fight austerity and mobilise the movement that's been energised by independence, or to implement austerity cuts. But unfortunately in Dundee this week, an SNP-led council, they just announced that they are going to implement £8.5 billion worth of austerity cuts. Where are those cuts? Turning Point, Quarriers, care for the elderly, disabled groups. In other words, they're accepting the logic of capitalism in crisis and implementing those cuts. Another huge opportunity this week for the SNP around rail nationalisation. The SNP could have nationalised the railways, but instead what did they do? They've handed it over to a bunch of Dutch profiteering bastards who are going to run the railway. And we agree with the RMG that the SNP should have nationalised the railways in Scotland. And when it comes to the working class movement and fighting austerity, there's one story I always remember. I was inspired by the pension strike in November 2011. What did John Swinney say? John Swinney says, I don't support that strike, I've already crossed the picket line. So we should not sow illusions that the SNP are fundamentally a vehicle that will radically alter the situation and challenge capitalism. That's not to say we don't work with SNP members and support them in their fight to push it leftwards. So for example, the first demand I put in the 60,000 members of the SNP is, let's change the policy in NATO. Let's make sure we oppose membership in NATO. So what's the challenge for the left? I believe that the challenge for the left in Scotland is the need to build a united left alternative to austerity. The issue for us now is how do we convert the independence movement into a radical, militant, anti-austerity movement that opposes every single cut, whether it's a Labour council, a Lib Dem council, or an SNP council. We will mobilise and oppose any cuts from these parties that are taking place. And our opportunity is to try and build a united left movement that's rooted fundamentally inside the working class movement. What I think that means concretely is that the movement that's mobilised behind hope over fear, which we see tomorrow in George Square. In fact, I'm in favour of, I'm trying to write my back tired, but I'm in favour of having one in Dundee. We want one in Edinburgh, we want one in Fife, and every city across the country, we should be mobilising. The working class and will not be the vehicle for building real social change. We know the trade union leaders won't lead the fight. They've already called the action off in unison in England and Wales. So we need to build a new movement in Scotland that is not shaped by the historic divisions of the past. The truth of the matter is the new forces that have been drawn into the campaign don't really know the difference between the SSP, the SWP, the Solidarity. But I know people who think they're joining the Tories party when they're joining the SSP. Because they don't know. And I think that it's very important to draw a line under these historic differences and make an attempt to refocus a new mass movement. I've never had a better opportunity. In all the years I've been involved, a huge opportunity to unite the left and lead a radical, militant,
working class movement against austerity, a chance to build an alternative to the treachery of the trade union leaders, the treachery of the Labour Party, and indeed the fake radicalism of the SNP. So let's do it, let's seize the moment.